Hello, everyone. This is episode 24 of the Three Body Problem. It is December 7th, 2024. I'm joined by my buddies Costin, Raiu, and Juan Andres. Juan Andres checking in from Washington, D.C. How are you, my friend?
Good, man. Just wrapped up the third edition of the malware analysis primer for non-technical students course at the Alperovich Institute. So it's been 5 days of grueling reversing with folks that have never done it before, it's always interesting. It's a really interesting experience. So I'm happy to be done with it and still kind of like processing. Trying to move myself to binary ninja, trying to take in everything that the students were kind of figuring out along the way. So good, happy to be
Quickly, are you
here.
guys buying? Are you guys buying this ChatGPT $200 version for your work? Do you think it's going to be a big, massive upgrade over what we're currently paying for
Whoa,
to
whoa!
do
There's a two
reverse
hundred
engineering coding?
dollar there's a $200 version of ChatGPT. Like, what am I missing here? I've been under a rock for a week,
With under
and like
anesthesia.
you guys came up. Yeah, what the? I'm
Costin
excited. I
checking
will
in
buy
from.
it. I don't know what it is, but I'll buy it right now.
It's
Like,
funny. Costin
So
checking in from
what
Bucharest, Romania.
what you were previously buying for 20, it now costs 200. Like there goes
but it's
inflation.
10 times better. It's
No, it's the
10x the
same.
LLM.
It's the
I
same
think it's
thing,
probably
but now
because
it's
O one is
200.
out of preview. I'm guessing it's because O one went out of preview yesterday. So, like, we
They
No,
can talk
announced
it's
about this. I
yesterday.
because
know
they're
this is the
running out
intro
of money.
periods, but they're running out of money. Gotta pay for the
Costin,
nuclear
how are you?
plants to do this.
I'm good. I'm good. Like everyone here in Bucharest, Romania, and in my country, we are shocked about elections, interference, chaos, Russian disinformation, influence ops, TikTok. I joined TikTok, installed TikTok on my phone for the
Wow.
first time. I didn't even know how TikTok looks like, but yeah, now I have TikTok on my phone.
You're
All
learning
right,
some
we'll get to the
dances.
Romanian. We'll get deep into the heart of the Romanian election situation because I understand you guys cancel your elections just yesterday in the
No
middle
more
of the voting.
elections.
Crazy,
I
President
crazy,
wish we
crazy.
stays.
knew that was an option. If we'd known that was an option, we could have pulled that off a few weeks back.
Like America can learn a bit from Romania, yeah.
While
But on the
Juan
other
was
hand, like you get stuck with the same president. The president had a speech yesterday, and he said, "And by the way, I'm not going anywhere."
here we go.
There we
While
go.
Juan was reversing under a rock, an OpenAI was releasing ChatGPT Pro, a $200 version that's promising amazing things for you guys on your research side. We had some news out of Microsoft and Lumen Technologies surrounding Turla. We found out, more importantly, that Turla is called Secret Blizzard, which is Microsoft's name for it. And the big story here is that there's more evidence and additional technical uh, uh, descriptions of Turla, which is FSB linked Russian threat actor, compromising other APTs and hijacking their tools. In this case, there's a focus on hijacking tools from a Pakistani APT, a non Pakistani APT, and then getting into Afghan and Indian networks. It's this kind of fourth party collection, spy versus spy thing. Juan, you spoke about this at Virus Bulletin. Obviously, Turla has been a big uh, group that you guys have tracked closely. Nothing new
Yeah.
here, correct?
I wouldn't say that. A lot of new here, actually. So, a couple of different things, right? I'm a huge fan of Turla, a variety of different ways. And frankly, like even the malware analysis course, right? Like we just spent the past 5 days reverse engineering an old agent BTZ sample. Turla is the gift that keeps on giving. On Along that note, they have been incredibly interesting as always, right? Like Turla has been interesting at all kinds of periods of its development, right? So like the Moonlight Maze era, they were breaking ground, Agent BTZ, Maker's Mark, what do you want to call it? Operation Buckshot Yankee era. They figured out how to do this like not just like USB jumping in order to get to military classified networks, but then also using satellites for exfiltration. Some work that Costin and Stefan Tanase put out some years ago. Turla has always been sort of at the forefront of doing really cool, very professional kind of work. And in that sense, they're very rewarding as a threat actor to track. Now, over the past couple of years, they seem to kind of disappear. Not really, not fully, but like in the context of watching like the invasion of Ukraine and everybody that was playing ball there, it seemed like Turla, as we say in Spanish, shined by its absence, right? Like it really didn't seem to be
That's not
to have a
Spanish.
very well. Yes, I'm making it digestible for our
What is it in
32
Spanish?
listeners. Brillan por su ausencia.
There you go.
They shine by their absence. So, we kept wondering, and then eventually sort of Mandian and a few other folks did some great work sort of revealing where that it's not that they weren't there, they were just kind of focused on certain types of operations, and among them, they were doing some interesting victim stealing and fourth party collecting across a variety of different operations. So we first heard from Mandiant that they might have been taking advantage of this, like of I believe Andromeda infections that had been left around. Now we're hearing about sort of this Pakistani fourth party thing, but I think the first time we got a really clear indication that Turla was taking advantage of this I drink your milkshake style fourth party collecting was actually a GCHQ NCSC report where they let us know that Turla had popped oil rig command and control servers and operations, so Iranian operations, and they were using those as a first stage and something that they could piggyback off of. And not just do victim stealing and get on the exfil, but also deploy their own tools through that and take advantage of the web shells that were already in place. So the Turla folk are on a new level and a new sort of paradigm of interesting shit, which is, instead of just trying to hit victims themselves, why not go after the people that have the regional knowledge to go after the important targets in their own space, hack their operators, hack their command and control servers, hack their infrastructure, take advantage of web shells, take advantage of the lack of like Nobus design to how other people run their ops, and just sort of be able to sail by at a level that we as researchers are just not going to be able to discern that their hand is involved. So it's a really fascinating thing to see, and it's great to see that it's not just one time or two times. Now it's the third time, which means there's more than this, and we just we're only getting lucky every once in a while and figuring out what they're up to.
That's why I say there's nothing new here, meaning they've popped other APTs infrastructure in the past and stolen stuff. The Iranian stuff has been documented in the past. The Andromeda stuff has been documented in the past. What I find interesting here, Costin, is that the initial access mechanism isn't currently known, which is kind of a common thing we see in these kinds of malware attacks. Do you think, like, what do you think is happening here? And let me just pinpoint it. Microsoft actually put out a report alongside our friends at Black Lotus Labs that called attention to the fact that tools and infrastructure of at least 6 other threat actors over the last 7 years were used by these Turla people. When Juan says I'm a fan of Turla, he's talking about like the technical brilliance, the academic kind of pursuit of understanding these things. Would you put Turla up there as like one of these pinnacle APTs?
Yeah, actually, it was just yesterday I was trying to find this report. I'm sure a lot of you remember it. It was between some of those leaked classified documents from Snowden, which was like called Turla designed by geniuses, operated by morons.
Morons,
Morons.
yes.
Something like that. I couldn't find it. Unfortunately, it looks like Google doesn't let you find it anymore, so I was sad. But I remember that it's not just us saying that Turla is pretty special, but it's for sure one of these unique threat actors that keep showing up. They keep survive. Doesn't matter. Then there's new times. There's new infection mechanisms. Just keep in mind that you can probably trace Turla back to the 1994 Moonlight Maze, and they've been kind of there almost forever, if you want. Perhaps the first big APT that is not associated with Western intelligence. By the way, what was interesting here is exactly what you were saying, that the initial access mechanism used by the Turla to compromise Storm 156 site copy is not currently known. So what I was thinking here in terms of possibilities, and I think that this is maybe also what Microsoft is hinting, that Storm 156 operators deploy this Arsenal v2, which is their command and control backend. And perhaps Turla has a 0-day in the backend, which wouldn't be surprising at all. I know people who are actually developing 0 days for malicious CNC backend. So this has been happening for many years.
Sophos?
So that's one. I would.
Hey,
well, I don't
you
know.
leave him
I don't
alone.
know. Leave Sophos alone.
Leave Sophos alone.
No.
I
No.
know. I throw that in as an aside, but like this breaking into C2s is a big part of our business, their business, right?
It's I think it's a big part of some companies' business, which have been developing 0 days for different kind of frameworks, like Cobalt Strike, if you want, but also a lot of criminal malware, including why not APT backends as well. I think I remember there was a case in which there was like a very interesting situation with a Western threat actor, where the malware and the CNC were kind of the same. So they were forming a type of a mesh network, which actually means that the CNC can be orchestrated in the same way as the malware by just pushing commands in the networks. In other words, you can run commands on the CNC through the malware. So there are interesting. Huh? I think it was a Western actor, not Winty. Where this
There's
was
a Winty ability to do this as well, but
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that this practice of hacking into CNCs operated by APTs is probably more popular than publicly shown. So yeah, one possibility is that they are pawning Arsenal v2xz, and I think the other possibility is that the Storm 156 operators, they're just infected, they're owned by Turla. So whenever they buy the new VPS, and actually Microsoft says that sometimes the CNCs are compromised even before they have time to deploy the Arsenal, which kind of suggests to me that the operators are owned, and the Turla guys, they just see it whenever they buy a new VPS or server, they immediately harvest the new credentials and use them to deploy their new tool sets on that CNC. Which is like, yeah, it's a fascinating story. Actors on actors, like spying on each other.
No chances of collusion where it's being passed back and forth. You think this is an adversarial action, right?
It doesn't look like collusion because if it was collusion, I think that the site copy transparent tribe guys, they wouldn't just let the Turla guys run their tools in that fashion on the CNCs. Maybe it would be like, yeah, we do a partnership and we will deploy your things when we agree and so on. But this looks more like in the line of hitting each other, if you want.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you pay attention to instances where we have seen cooperation, right? So there's a subtlety here worth mentioning, right? So I forgot, as I was listing examples, I forgot to mention sort of the suspicions around Tomiris and Turla, which the belief is that this Tomiris threat actor, I believe, is from Kazakhstan, and the idea being here that there's folks that suspect that Turla has pulled something similar with Tomiris and sort of maybe appropriated some of their tooling and appropriated some of their sort of jump on some of their ops. And then there's folks who suspect, like I believe it was Ivan. Damn it, I'm not.
Ivan Kwiatkowski.
Kwiatkowski every fucking time. Even Imbar. Shout out to Imbar Raz, who spent like 20 minutes trying to tell me how to pronounce his name.
Ivan.
Yeah, there's a suspicion that that they may be collaborating with the Kazakh APT, and then there's folks who believe that it's the same kind of like jumping on their ops and victim stealing. I'm not sure which one is which. I mean, I've heard arguments in favor of both. I personally would assume that it's not collaboration, but it's not without precedent, right? Like the suspicion that we have is that in the past, when we were looking at, or Costin, when you were looking at Red October, the suspicion has, my understanding is that the suspicion is that at some point that was a joint operation between the Russians and the Ukrainians in a bygone era where they could collaborate. But what we saw was they had a shared infrastructure and tooling for that op. And the minute that there was the invasion of Crimea and there's this falling out, you see the emergence of Cloud Atlas, and it's their own kind of tooling, their own kind of infrastructure, precisely because you've had a falling out. You can't use any of the stuff that your now frenemy knows about. It just precisely because of the operational risk of what we're describing here. So there are ways that we've seen APTs collaborate. It's why, like, I know folks didn't love the term, but it's why I started talking about like supra threat actors and like the idea of joint platforms, because we see it on the Western side, right? Like Five Eyes has this compatibility framework between Reagan and Equation Group. You have the Wachowski API, like all these different approaches that you do in order to coordinate multiple development teams working together, even when they can't see each other. But I really don't think that's the case here. I think this is Turla making lesser threat actors pay for not developing things properly, for not using nobody but us or Nobus style development of web shells and backdoors, and for not securing their command and control servers. I mean, it's there for the taking. Why wouldn't you, right?
They're not the only threat actor doing this, though, right? I mean, that's the reason we have the Teddy report, the territorial dispute, and like getting on to other people's. Well, that was more like getting on to victim boxes and seeing who else were on there. But you have to imagine other APTs are doing this. This is not the sole.
Oh yeah. Yeah, Costin and I actually wrote a VB paper about this. So sorry for folks that are interested, right? What did we call it? Walking in your enemy's shadow. It was about deconfliction and what happens when people take advantage of like fourth party collection. Now, I think that was like VB 2017 or 18. And the whole paper is about this topic. So it's not that it's new, it's that it's very different to discuss minor incidents of what we see, or discuss suspicions or possibilities, and then to talk about the actuality of an op and what it means to our limited visibility, right? Like what we're saying is this threat actor is now doing things in a way that we cannot discern, that we simply cannot, we're not going to be able to see unless somebody just so happens to be paying attention to what's happening on that command and control server, what's happening in their comms. If you have NetFlow, if you have either Lumen and Danny Adamitis paying attention, or GCHQ, and everybody else is just like, if you get lucky, if you happen to get on the C2, if you happen to see some of the smoke signals, maybe you can tell that this shit's going on, but it's not easy, right?
I thought it was funny to see Microsoft linking to one of the reports that we all three participated in and helped produce back in the past on Epic Turla, to see some of our work on there was. It was pretty
Which
interesting.
ended up being the name of Juan's website, right?
Yes, epicturla.com. You can go and find all these papers that Juan is mentioning.
All the
here.
papers are
point.
there. Yeah, I need to update that site, man. There's so much stuff that I haven't put on there. But yes, all the papers from VB and everything are on there. So
epicturla.com.
Drive traffic to this site.
One of the things I noticed from Microsoft's report, and a little bit from the Black Lotus Lab reporting on this, is that Turla operates differently on Afghanistan boxes versus Indian boxes. Did you catch that, Costin? They just operate differently. Do you think this is like because of our level of visibility, Microsoft visibility, or do you think it's like FSB doing, just being more careful on certain boxes versus other boxes?
That's a good question, and I was also thinking what this means from the point of view of side copy and the Turla guys reading the report, because we know that threat actors, they do read the reports that vendors publish. So when you read this kind of report, you immediately realize that there's entities out there watching everything that you are doing through Windows Defender, through NetFlow, and so on. So the first thing I was thinking is that what kind of measures they're going to take to stop all that, like disable Defender, use more VPNs, use more encryption, abandon HTTP, try to use HTTPS more often, and so on. So it could be maybe perhaps an artifact related to how the telemetry comes from these different areas of the world. That could be a possibility. But yeah, that was one of the things which attracted my attention as well, together with the fact that Microsoft said that they're tracking Turla, and when we are able, we directly notified customers. So I was thinking, like, what does it mean when we are able? Are they
What
talking
does
about
being
the
unable mean? Like, flip it
yeah,
now. When does someone become unable to be notified? Juan, you got a thought on
yeah,
this?
good
Oh, I mean,
question.
easy, right? Like if you're not trying to be nefarious about it, when we don't identify who the victim actually is. The other one is like, how do you notify certain like sanctioned organizations and folks? And like, are you going to hit up the Taliban and be like, hey guys, your Ministry of Foreign Affairs
Iran
happens to be popped, right? Like,
or Russia.
yeah.
Is this
Oh,
just muddying attribution waters, or is this just an actor getting a mission accomplished? Juan, yeah, like this, we've talked ad nauseum on this podcast about the problems around attribution and quality of attribution and who is good and who isn't good. How can we, as consumers of your content, trust your attribution when this madness is happening in the back end at scale?
You can't. And I think that's precisely why we've tried to be as circumspect and careful as we have in the past, and frowned upon people that would do facile attribution without couching it in all these different statements about, like I think people get annoyed often about us kind of like mincing words. And we've had this conversation even on this podcast of like, why do you bother, saying this, that, and the other? Like, why don't you just call it like it is? And I think that the truth is that if we're calling it like it is, then it's not simple and it's not approachable. It's not definitive, right? Like anybody who's walking out here being like, these Russian threat actors, these North Korean threat actors, like we say it as like a quick off the cuff remark because you can't couch every sentence you ever utter in 30 qualifiers. But when we're writing these stuff in these blogs, like I really frown upon the oversimplification of like just throwing attribution out there as like a country thing, or even worse, like you get these like over enthusiastic crowd strikey type folks who like wanna go, oh, this is center blah 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 of the FSB whatever, and you're like, dude, you do not know that. You don't even know that like a little bit. And the reason that I complain about it is simply that if we're being intellectually honest, for as long as we're only looking at cyber as technical indicators, then attribution is an inaccessible thing to the level that people want to have as far as like organizational attribution or individual attribution. And sometimes we get amazing breakthroughs and people fuck up, and there are ways in which we can connect technical clusters to real life things, but it almost always comes hand in hand with some other piece of information, some OSINT, some leak, some whatever that we can then use to surmise. It's never out of the pure technical stuff. And
Then
and
why
so
then
you
why
shouldn't
should
be
I
trusting my
trust?
attribution if I just tell you that. You
I'm
should be
asking you,
trusting my
why should I?
attribution when I come to you and say, sorry, I just, you should trust it when I come to you and I say, hey, this looks to be a North Korea aligned threat actor. Aligned. Like they look like they're working in this way. And the reason that we say it that way is I don't know if it's somebody sitting in North Korean intelligence department wearing their like badges and a uniform, or if it's a subcontracting unit that they've hired that's a North Korean company, if there is such a thing, or they've outsourced it to a Chinese company, or the minister of whatever called a friend of his in Thailand, who then went and subcontracted 4 teenagers who are also doing these ops. And we've seen all these configurations. Like, we've seen all of these things before. We see it with like the way the MSS runs like shell companies. You see it with like the externalization to certain types of defense contractors in places where that's legal or palatable. And we have also seen it. God, what's the right reference? Costin. Cuckoo's Egg era, right? The Cliff Stoll classic that everybody adores. That was German, East German hackers being recruited by the KGB to go steal documents from the US. And you can say that that's a Russia-aligned operation, but to say that that is a Russian threat actor, or worse yet, KGB directorate, whatever, is an oversimplification that quickly gets into inaccuracy.
Why should I trust Microsoft and Lumen saying that this is Turla? Why is it not possible that this could be a Lambert masquerading as Turla inside these Pakistani C2s? Or is that just too far a stretch?
Everything is possible, right? I think that the problem is once you start getting into this kind of like conspiratorial thinking,
Conspiracy
there's
riot.
there's a point at which conspiracy, like there's a reason counterintelligence professionals start losing their fucking minds, right? Like there's a reason you get the James Jesus Angleton Wilderness of Mirrors type shit where there's an inability of human beings to understand the limits of inference and deduction. And you start to, it's very easy to like twist yourself into a pretzel when it comes to counterintelligence and then start going, well, I think that they want me to think that this is Turla. But what if they think that what if they want me to think that I think that it's Turla, but it's actually Pakistan,
And it
but
never
actually
ends.
maybe it's whatever. And like you get to a point where like it's not that everything is Occam's razor. Clearly, that's not the case here, right? Like there are complex dynamics. It's more that there's a very big difference between possibility and actuality, and if you can't if the only way that you get lost that way is if you allow that everything is possible, and that your deductions don't need to be tied, or like your competing hypotheses don't need to be tied to like actual indicators, right? Like if we just go for every possibility, then yes, this could be the Lamberts who then, are pretending to be Turla, who's then pretending to be, the Pakistanis, and sure. But as far as what we're seeing, we're lucky enough to have really great like net flow to the point where Danny can come out and say, oh, we saw an RDP connection from this machine to this C2 for 2 hours. Like you're talking about how the back end was being instrumented by this one other box and so on. And that's not a small thing. You have a very real piece of information that's substantiating this unlikely scenario. I don't think we need to then, take that to the nth degree and nth expression and subsequently lose the insight that we're being provided.
As a consumer of your content, I'm trying to get to a place where I'm trusting the attribution that I'm reading. And Costin previously told me Mandiant is the best, so okay, I just generally trust what comes out of Mandiant. Is it the same for Microsoft? Is it the same for Black Lotus Labs in your mind, Costin? And how are the quality of the IOCs here? And isn't that where we really get the evidence of what true attribution is or what isn't?
Well, I would say here that I'm happy when people say Turla, and whenever we have IOCs which are associated with Turla, but the new variants of that which indicate that whoever is dropping these new variants has access to the source code, so it's not just patched binaries, right? But they're like recompiling the binaries, and I think that in the end, the most important attribution artifact is the victims. If the victims are of interest for Turla traditionally, right, which have been interested in Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Europe, but at the same time Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Middle East, They've also been running certain targeting certain extremists in Chechnya and other Caucasian republics. I think that we can trust it. I mean, I have no reason to doubt any of this attribution. It to me it looks clear. And again, I'm a simple man. I'm happy with the IOX, and actually I was not happy with the IOX because there were no samples on VirusTotal, but one of our good friends pinged John Lambert, and miracle, thank you, John Lambert, thanks, John, and the Microsoft folks, the samples have appeared on VirusTotal, so people can download them, those with VirusTotal access, they can download them and play with the samples, so that's wonderful.
Actual samples, not just IOCs, traditional
and,
IOCs.
Even better, not just TTPs, IOCs, and not just IOCs, samples.
All right. Well, that allows us a perfect
Special
pivot. Perfect pivot to help
More
us
Russia.
pivot to. No, not more Russian. I want to pivot to the absence of IOCs and samples, which is the fact that we are we might be a month into the first public disclosure of Salt Typhoon, and the U.S. government actually held an on-the-record briefing. CISA and the FBI held an on-the-record briefing this week that says that we have no idea when we will be able to disinfect and kick these guys out of our networks. We got official confirmation that there are 8 organizations compromised. Thankfully, T-Mobile was able to repel them, so shout out to T-Mobile. But
I'm sorry.
the U.S. government put out like some guidance and technical documentation to help protect against this thing. Costin, you've been very, very upfront saying, listen, no IOCs, we're really, really not doing anything here. How do you read what we just learned about the fact that there's no disinfection and the government seems to be kind of not sure where they're heading?
Not sharing. Well, I've been saying this before, and if you remember, my main complaint was no IOC means we don't know how many ISPs and how many other countries are affected besides the United States. I mean, I love you guys, I love the United States, but wondering, what about Romania? What about countries in the European Union? Are they affected as well? And my guts were saying that
other
yes,
countries.
there are other countries. And now we find out that like a very low number, like a couple dozen other countries, very low number, are also affected by Salt Typhoon, which to me it's, well, not surprising, but shocking, the fact that we are talking about dozens of other countries. Can you imagine the scope of surveillance, the entire dragnet that you can actually operate by pawning ISPs, telcos in a number of like couple dozen countries. It's just mind-blowing. And the fact that, again, still no IOX, and those countries like, yeah, good luck.
Brother, I will say
notified.
this. I'm happy to hear about the about other countries being popped, because I have much greater expectations as to the telcos of some of these other countries. In particular, I'm thinking about, shout out to Brian Candlish, who's an absolute boss when it comes to this TI stuff, and I know has been like personally engaged in some of these things. And also shout out to the UK having a proper legal framework around what they can do with ISPs as a public utility. So if those places are getting popped, I'm just saying if, right? Like, I actually have greater hopes that we're not going to get some, oh, everything's fine, we already cleaned it, or like the usual legal clamming up, like 30 lawyers in a room, no researchers, no IOCs, nothing to see here type bullshit. I would expect these other countries to at least be more engaged and have greater recourse. What that turns into, I don't know. But we clearly have gone into the hopeless phase in the US, where we're just kind of like, well, nothing's happening, no one can do anything, it's a bad season, it's bad time, okay, well, it is what it is. Welcome China, our new telco overlords, like, we'll just live with you now. Right.
No, Costin has made the point
for me, this is like, welcome to my world. So, like, let's understand the reality. What does it mean? It means that China can see your location, let's say, right? Through the access to the telco, they see your location, they intercept your traffic, so they see your traffic, they intercept your SMSs, and they know whom you're calling, right? That's my reality. That's how I live. I live knowing that there's people out there who can do all that. So like it makes no difference.
not
And
American.
welcome to my reality.
But you're not American, Costin. It's okay for you to like feel that way, but for us to feel that way is just not cool, man. Like that's not what we signed up for. I'm actually
Wait a second.
cold. I
No.
needed to get a blanket.
That,
This is
the
just-
other thing which I tell you is real for me is that Coca-Cola is not the same in Romania and the US. It's just different.
Yeah.
And
It's
like
the
this
sugar.
is not fair. It's not fair.
Do you guys
It's the
get better
sugar type.
Coca-Cola?
No,
Mexicans
worse.
do.
You know where's the Coca-Cola is better? In Cuba, because they use the original equipment from the 20s when the Americans built the factories in Cuba. So it's like all the original equipment with the original formula, with the sugar cane
good
and all that
local
stuff.
sugar. Yeah,
Yeah,
you can
local
still get it
sugar.
in Mexico. Like that's what it tasted like when I was a kid in Ecuador, and now like you have to pay premium for it.
Costin has made the point that not sharing IOCs could actually be considered reckless, leaving a lot of people exposed, a lot of people not being able to think. Mr. America, there is a lot of sharing of IOCs happening in the background, right? I mean, we have to imagine that in this big,
I
massive
wouldn't call it
investigation,
a lot. I would not
what's
call
happening
it a
in the
lot.
background? What do you know about what's happening in the background? Help the people understand what this investigation looks like. Why I asked the question, we have a Jeff Green, Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity at CISA, basically saying, given where we are in discovering the activity, I think it would be impossible for us to predict a time frame on when we'll have full eviction. So give me a sense of what you know is happening behind the scenes around just getting this thing fixed.
Well, I mean, I don't expect CISA to know absolutely anything about what it's talking about here, and I think that that's well within what we're hearing from this gentleman, Jeff Green.
That's a
of
controversial
saying, like,
statement, though, because CISA is out front briefing national security reporters on this threat. To say they don't know what they're talking about is like a big...
Yeah, I mean, they're out front briefing national security reporters on this threat. Did they mention sort of what their role is in any of this? Is it just briefing national security reporters?
They're the cybersecurity and infrastructure blah blah agency. I mean, isn't it their
Blah, blah.
job to?
I can't believe there's two securities in that name. It's just the redundancy. Anyways,
What's happening in the background?
Yeah, I think that there is a certain amount of IOC sharing. There's not a ton of IOC sharing. There is a legitimate reason why there's legitimate reasons why some of this is not being shared widely. That does not mean that I necessarily agree with the fact that it's not being shared widely. But
Tell me what these
some of the
reasons are.
some of the IOCs directly point to the victims, which is always a tough thing to handle, right? Like if the IOC is like Lumen with like an I instead of an E.com, then the idea that there's any kind of like preserving victimology and sort of not putting those organizations front and center is not easy. At the same time, I don't think that's the worst of it. I think the worst of it is that there are not a lot of functional IOCs that can be shared, right? Like on the network side, what am I going to give you? A list of like orb network IPs that change every 2 days or change every week, or that are actually a tunnel that is being used by 4 different Chinese APTs, right? Like that in itself is not great. The next part is what? Well, if we were able to get anything out of our Cisco appliances that are serving as the initial and permanent entry vector beachhead into these telco orgs, what am I going to fucking tell you, man? Like, I don't know how much I was able to get out of this Cisco appliance in the first place. I can tell you TTPs, but nobody seems to be all that happy to hear that, right? Like, oh, they went into the appliance and they started collecting PCAPs from the inside, and then they like took those creds and they moved laterally hands on keyboard, and then they did a bunch of cool shit. They didn't drop any files on disk. They didn't really do any of that. They cleaned up, and we got like half of these like half-ass logs inside of our org. Here you go. Congratulations. Happy hunting, right? Like there's nothing about it that is actually genuinely satisfying.
That's about the most information we've ever gotten. That sentence out to you about what they're doing.
So look,
Well, there's a reason why this threat is as tough as it is. And then, sorry, Costin, just the last bit. There's one third factor, and I think it's the most pressing factor, which is there's a fuck ton of lawyers involved in this shit. Everybody's worried about liability, and these companies, the telcos themselves, I don't think have much of an interest in speaking up at this point. There's no liability protection for them. They are very easily going to be politicized in the middle of this shit, given the victims. And I think they're just battening down the hatches and trying to make sure that the storm passes without actually taking them down or ending up in some congressional testimony or having literally the president of the United States come start shitting on your telco because, it was used to spy on your campaign.
Costin, you wanted to say something?
Right. Well, several things. Well, first of all, I wanted to say that while lawyers and you guys are arguing about if it's right or not to release and liability and so on, Trend Micro published 2 blogs on this thingy. And I was saying the most useful part here would simply be to say that, yes, what we are seeing is very similar or the same as in these 2 Trend Micro blogs. That would be fantastic. Simply saying that these activities are connected and the same, because
But it's not.
there's people saying like, no, that's like something else. But
Yeah.
simply saying that, or even saying like, no, that's not what we are seeing here. What we are seeing here is something totally different. I think even that would be super useful in my opinion.
I'll repurpose the rument and just put it out here. Trend Micro is not totally off base, but what they refer to as Earth estuaries, and I'm guessing they got some pushback because in the second Earth estuaries report, they started to mince words about like, Earth estuaries includes Salt Typhoon and Ghost Emperor and Famous Sparrow, but not quite exactly the same, but some part of this is this, that, and the other. But we think it's Salt Typhoon anyways. You're like, cool, right? Like, I think it's just a lack of granularity. Like, our understanding is that these things are related. There's a broader cluster that includes the like demo deck stuff. It includes earlier targeting of some interesting satellite orgs before. It includes the Famous Sparrow stuff, but to say that Earth estuaries in its totality is equivalent to Salt Typhoon in its totality is apparently not an accurate thing to say. And I say all these apparentlys and whatever, not to be mysterious, but rather because like I am grabbing tidbits from brilliant people who know a lot better, who are very engaged in this, and I'm trying to do my best to represent what they are working on, but that's the best I can do at this point.
He knows more than he's letting on. That's fine. After Juanito, after your government spent all these years telling us that encryption was terrible and
I
right?
wanted to. That was my second comment.
Wait, let me toss it out there because for many years Apple had to go to fight against creating backdoors and maintaining end-to-end encryption in our communications. We now have the FBI and the CISA calls basically telling Americans, hey, use the encrypted messengers for your voice calls because end-to-end encryption is the only thing here.
Bro.
Which is hilarious in one point, but it also goes right back to the source of the issue is the fact that all these telcos are storing all this data in unencrypted. Costin, you wanted to jump in on this, like who's the deep state operative now? I don't understand. What am I as an American supposed to do?
Well, you should be first of all trying European Coca-Cola first and see what the rest of the world tastes like. And then just think what the others are going through. And again, start using VPNs that you guys have been dismissing for years. Like, you don't really need a VPN. Like, a VPN is just like a headache and it doesn't bring you any added security. Well, it does if you live in Europe or somewhere else. Disable iMessage, disable FaceTime, use more encrypted messengers. Don't use just one encrypted messenger, use several. Switch them regularly. So
use pigeons.
Nobody
put
has
things
like
on text. Cipher text your messages. Write them in a little letter. Put them in a bottle. Throw them in the ocean. You know, like
But now we're enabling terrorism,
become
though, right?
become a terrorist,
oh,
like not a a
adorable.
terrorist. A
Wow,
terrorist
that's a
is
t-shirt.
somebody who uses Tor extensively and they read the Linux journal. So that's a terrorist. Become a terrorist. That I was saying. Again, it's funny, but I think this is just a step. And the next step will be, yeah, when everyone's using these encrypted messengers, the next step will be, well, because now everyone is using encrypted messengers, we need a backdoor. Because, yeah, the terrorists are doing the kind of things that terrorists do. And now we don't have the ability anymore to spy on tourists. Not you two here, like Ryan, Juan, or whatever, but on the other guy. It doesn't matter that you'll be just
The other.
included in the whole dragnet of spying. Yeah, and to be honest, this is already happening in Europe with chat control, which
This
is
thing
another
just
big story we discussed in the past.
Juanito, do you think things change at the telco level around encrypting data and making sure and trying to avoid this catastrophe?
I don't think encrypting data alone is really like gonna do any of this stuff, right? Like the issues that we have here are much broader, and I don't think that they are a matter of encryption. So like first and foremost, right, like we knew the people asking to like backdoor encryption and whatever. We knew they were wrong, we knew they were idiots. Not everyone at the FBI is an idiot, but for the love of Christ, some of this stuff is fucking dumb. And you know, we told them back then, and then you see the situation and you go, well, we fucking told you. At the same time, this is not a problem that's entirely solved by encryption. It's also not a problem that's solved by a VPN, right? Like we've seen malicious VPN providers who've stood up entire infrastructure just to spy on a subset of people who are trusting enough to use just a random company X, supposedly out of Switzerland, because everything in Switzerland is super fucking safe, right? Like, and we're just gonna like shove all of our traffic to these servers so they don't even need to hack the telco. They can just literally own the VPN and see everything that runs through it. So, look, encryption is valuable, but it is not a silver bullet in every way. There's a reason you still spy on telcos. At the end of the day, right? Remember, we kill people based on metadata. Even if you encrypted, I mean, technically, all those calls have some level of encryption. Technically, all the messages, whatever they're using, you know, WhatsApp and Signal and iMessage and everything, they all have some level of encryption. So we're not saying that that's being seen plain text. But even if you can, um, even if you can't decrypt any of it, knowing who talks to whom for how long, when, and where, who was where at any given moment, alongside what other people in that same place. Like, there's a reason CDR records are so valuable. And CDR records are just metadata. They are not, you know, they don't necessarily, at best, maybe you can get some text messages, right? Some SMS text messages, right? But that stuff is still sells at a premium in this sort of like data gray market, because that is more than enough for you to profile things, for you to figure out what subsequent operations would be, for you to have compromise on people, for you to be able to do quite a bit of parallel discovery. And it's as simple as Costin said he was here, but no, he was actually at this other cell tower at that time, and that cell tower also included the phones of X, Y, and Z, and they were there for 3 hours. That's enough, right? Crypto doesn't fix that.
All right, let me pivot to
I
the next
just
story
want
quickly.
Can
Go.
I like just leave a conspiracy theory, like the conspiracy Ryan theory at the end? I just say that at some, like in some cases, it may be convenient not to kick some of these actors out, right? Because it gives you plausible deniability. It wasn't us spying on those; it was the Chinese. So, yeah, maybe sometimes it's good to have the Chinese in the networks for plausible deniability.
That's a conspiracy too far, even for me, my friend. Let me pivot quickly to the other
If I
story.
disappear overnight, you know it was this.
Uh,
Citizen Lab, our friends at Citizen Lab, in a joint investigation with a publication called First Department, no, a legal assistant organization called First Department, discovered spyware covertly implanted on a phone returned to a Russian programmer accused of sending money to Ukraine after he was released from custody. There's a deeper story about him being recruited by the FSB and so on. But the part of the story that interests us is this spyware that was discovered on his phone after he had gotten out, and with similarities to the Monocle family of spyware, Monokle, which was previously reported on by Lookout Mobile Security. Costin, what do we know about this Monocle? Is this one of these spyware things we've tracked in the past?
Yeah, this is one of the things that I personally looked into and analyzed back in the days when it was attributed to a contractor to the Russian government called the Special Technologies Center. Now, this malware, I think that initially was used for a very interesting purpose. It was used for counterterrorism operations in the Middle East, in particular counterterrorism operations targeting Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and I know they were quite successful at that. So there were cases in which some of these terrorists, like commanders, they had their phones infected with Monocle, and later, days or weeks later, they were just they were taken out by a drone strike, a Russian drone strike, that is. So I think that initially this malware was used for counterterrorism purposes, which again, it raised a lot of questions when people saw the first report by Lookout. Again, we go back to the same story with Google being under a lot of hate and pressure because they published a blog with no IOCs, right? About something, we don't know what it was, that was allegedly used in some Western counterterrorism operations. So now we have the same situation from the other side, where the malware was publicly exposed. And again, there's no problem with that. Obviously, I'm not defending any sides. I'm just saying that it's an interesting difference between how these things are treated. But also, I think what is interesting here is that the malware, the Monocle family of spyware, which I think they also have an iOS version as well, is now used for more purposes. Like in this case, this Russian programmer that was accused of sending money to Ukraine. And you may wonder, like, why is that a problem? Well, sending money to Ukraine can get you into a lot of trouble if you live in Russia or in Belarus. Like, you do that and you end up, being called to the FSB headquarters and interrogated. And typically what people do, and what I heard, is that they end up paying a 10 times fee. So if they send like $5 to Ukraine, they will pay like 15 times more just to, as a bribe or things, just to get out. But just imagine if you pay more than that. It's a fine. It's correct. It's just a fine. I heard like let's say the extreme version of this story is that people paid for YouTube premium subscription, and they got in trouble with the KGB essentially. Why? Because YouTube is a terrorist organization, same as Meta, same as Facebook, and all the others. So they ended up paying a fine, like a big fine, for getting the pro subscription from YouTube.
This is typically loaded with direct physical access, right? So you have to have access to this Android device to get this thing loaded.
Correct. And they hide that into a legitimate looking application. So it can be something like Facebook or some kind of a clone or messenger, which kind of side loads the malware on startups. So the malware itself is hidden in a legitimate looking application. In this particular case, I think they were using a method that I've seen before. I've seen it with another malware family, which is called, I think, Mobdash or Mobidash, something like this. This method of side loading it is pretty similar to certain Mobidash samples that were being distributed in Russia. Maybe, I don't know, maybe those were also distributed by the FSB. That's another possibility, or maybe they just use this kind of method to better hide the malware. The reality is that from a heuristic point of view, this makes it difficult to detect. So I suspect that before this was known, the detection rate for that APK file would be very, very poor. So maybe even if, let's say, the programmer had an antivirus installed on his Android phone, I think it's doubtful that it would be able to catch this thing. So that, yeah, it makes it even more tricky to spot. But typically, you know that after you are arrested or called to one of these special places, if they take your phone and they keep it away from you for a couple of days, it will come back with gifts.
Yeah, you throw it in
In
the
the past,
trash when you get home.
we've seen it packed with hardware box. There was a case when they replaced the battery with a smaller battery and like a whole circuit with a microphone and everything, like a hardware backdoor. And of course, when it's easy, you'll get a software implant as well to keep an eye on what you are saying, whom you're talking to, and so on and so on.
Did we get IOCs?
We have IOCs, yeah. There's a hash for the payload, and I published also on Twitter the hash for the second stage decrypted payload. So after it gets decrypted and loaded in memory, and that's the malware family, which is, by the way, is not identical to previous monocle samples that I have seen, but there's certain similarities which makes it look like this is an update, either an updated version or kind of a fork of Monocle, or built on top of some of the same code as Monocle.
Is there a risk of going through airports and having this stuff happen in the space of seconds and minutes? You mentioned that if they held your phone for 2 days, chances are you go home, you have to burn this phone. Like, what is the risk of you and I walking through an airport and having something like this happen to us?
Well, I guess this is easier if they have they need your PIN code, so then you need to unlock the phone, and this is typically deployed using ADB. So it's implanted in the phone on Android devices using ADB. So it only takes, if you ask me, this is something you can do in 5 minutes, maybe less.
I see.
If you're like very fast. So absolutely, if somebody takes your phone and it's fully unlocked, right? And they walk away with the phone for 5 minutes and come back and say, yeah, everything's fine, here's your phone, there's a good chance that it already has something on it.
Juanito, any closing thoughts on this?
I mean, I think the more interesting part here is the discussion of this having possibly been a CT op in the past, or the use of Monocle in the past for counterterrorism. I bring that up because I don't like to let us off the hook too easily, right? Like, we are pretty brutal on some other folks, and I think it means that we also need to be pretty demanding on ourselves when we talk about some of these things. So I've always thought the discussion was very interesting as to whether how we feel about burning foreign counterterrorism operations, and I bring that up because there have been clear instances where we were dealing with maybe GRU counterterrorism or Chinese counterterrorism, which, I mean, Chinese counterterrorism, you can really like put it in quotations, right? But very strong quotes. But in any case, I mean, it's just something that I like to bring up, not with a very specific point, but rather to kind of just highlight some dissonance in our thinking, right? We don't seem all that troubled when it comes to, like, SOFAC APT-28 of old was a lot of counterterrorism stuff, right? Chechen terrorists and like stuff in the Caucasus and whatnot. And then eventually, sure, they broadened their remit, and I think it made it fair game for everybody to publish the way that they did, especially once you're getting into like election interference stuff and whatnot. No questions asked. But there is an element of CT that's getting disrupted, right? Like, and the
they
same thing
publish
happens
success
with
stories,
the
though?
Chinese.
Do they publish success stories and make it quite clear that these are CT operations? Because that's the crux of the issue. Is like,
Ryan, the beauty of autocratic regimes is you don't really need to publish anything. You don't need to really convince anyone of anything, right? You can just do your thing. right?
But it's up to Costin to know that this was to guess and surmise that this was a counterterrorism operation, because that gets into the conversation of how do we publicly discuss this, right? It's now up to researchers to guess and surmise and then make determinations of whether we should go public, whether we issue IOCs, whether we release a sample. This is the Google conundrum. We started this podcast, episode 1, I believe, on this paper on the Google thing that Costin talked about. And now that you've brought it up, it's just
I mean,
fascinating
it always
how
has
we
been.
view it.
It always has been up to Costin, and it always has been up to the researchers to surmise and figure stuff out. And it's also why, coming full circle to another pet topic that I'm constantly bringing up, it's also why we get so annoyed with like limits on publication and like innuendo and all this like bullshit about like, oh, you can't say that, you can't say this, you can't mention who the victim is, you can't mention what this type of thing, you really shouldn't include this, that, and the other. All of that like rounding out the edges that happens based on like corporate bullshit is also severely limiting when this is the only authoritative piece of information that the public and academia and policymakers and other researchers and historical accounts will ever have access to. And it's been put through like 3 rounds of filtering by Google's lawyers, Microsoft's lawyers, everybody else's fucking lawyers, and a bunch of random people in between who just have ideas about liability that's never actually played out in real life. Like it is limiting the historical record in a way that I think we should find very troubling.
Costin, I'm going to ask you to take the lead on our next story, because we'll pivot to a Solana Web3.js backdoor in what appeared to be a supply chain attack that targeted your favorite thing, which is these magic money cryptocurrency people. What do we know about this backdoor? Is this a typical common thing that happens? What is Solana? What is Web3.js? Fill us in, because I'm completely in the dark on your magic money people.
Sure. So Solana is one of these different kinds of magic money, but it's, I guess, one of the most prominent ones, together with Ethereum, if you want. And they're a bit different from, let's say, other kinds of magic money like Bitcoin or Monero, in the sense that they support what are considered like smart contracts. And the whole idea here is that that you should be able not just to maybe pass coins between yourselves, but also to write contracts on the blockchain, which are like entities supervising how the money works. So let's say, for instance, someone could write something like a betting game where everybody participates with a bit of money. And whenever enough money are gathered in there, let's say after a while, a winner is randomly selected and the winner receives all the money. So all that can be coded in the blockchain together with many, many different applications. And Solana is one of these blockchains which have the ability to deploy smart contracts, which are running, by the way, on a virtual machine, which leads to a lot of very cool attacks that can be developed. And the Lazarus group have been the leading threat actor exploiting smart contracts and stealing people's magic money through vulnerabilities, either in the compilers, race conditions in the compilers, or simple vulnerabilities in the smart contracts itself. So what we have here is that it's a supply chain attack, if you want. The problem, I think, with many of these smart contracts and with magic money is that it's kind of difficult to work with them directly, which is why people develop libraries. And these libraries make your life much easier to play with. So whenever you start including these libraries, you become dependent on them, and then you are at the risk of supply chain attacks. So whenever one of these libraries gets compromised, like the case here, then you download and you run the compromised version, and essentially any kind of private keys touching the compromised code means that all your magic money disappear. And typically when your magic money disappear, the chance of getting them back is small. It's not, I think it's not zero, but it's small, in the sense that sometimes exchanges can block stolen funds. So for instance, they can blacklist IP, like wallet addresses, and whenever money comes from or to that particular attacker address, they just seize the funds and then hopefully redistribute them to the victims. But that's like another topic here. What you need to keep in mind is that, yeah, supply chain attacks do happen a lot. Maybe this one is no different from many other supply chain attacks. And again, in my humble opinion, the Lazarus Group and some Russian cyber criminals are the best. They're essentially the masterminds behind many of these attacks.
And this is a confirmed supply chain compromise. I saw GitHub advisory saying any computer that has this package installed or running should be considered fully compromised. All secrets and keys stored on that computer should be rotated immediately from a different computer. Like this is. Do we have any sense of who the target was? Like we know we talk about supply chain, but where's the money? Where's the magic money being actually stolen?
Well, typically, what are the targets are kind of developers. So who would be, let's say, leveraging these libraries? That's developers, right? So developers, typically they do have magic money in the sense that maybe they entered early on, so they collected a lot of funds, or maybe they mined some of those that could have been mined back in the days. No longer the case. Also, not all the blockchains allow mining. Some of them are simply proof of stake chains. And I think that the targets would be developers and people who have a lot of these magic monies. Typically, people who have a lot of money and very little security experience. They leverage all these smart contracts without fully understanding how they are, without fully protecting their money. Maybe just they want to play with the code and see if they can write their own game or application, and they end up losing everything.
Juanito, do you play in this magic money world? Is this something you guys track closely?
I mean, those are two different things, right? Like we definitely track, especially with folks like Jim Walter over at Labs, like we track a lot of the criminal stuff around this. Also, Phil Stokes has done a great job just like keeping up with a lot of this North Korea stuff, which, I mean, these threat actors are almost, especially on Mac, which is a specialty, like it's almost all focused on cryptocurrency, like devs, cryptocurrency users, cryptocurrency wallets, cryptocurrency applications, getting Trojanized and so on. But like on a personal level, like, no, I'm not a magic money person. I got to play with it around the same time as everybody went all nuts on the stock market, like micro investments with Robinhood, and like we all played around and made and lost money in some insignificant fashion. But no, I'm not a gambler. I'm not a big fan of some of this stuff, and I am rather dismissive of it, not because I don't think it has intrinsic value or a possible valuable application, but I treat it the same way that I treat AI. Like there's an interesting core of technology that opens an interesting set of possibilities, and then there's a whole lot of like hustle culture hullabaloo around it, like making up a bunch of like smoke and mirrors, just distractions so that you can rug pull money away from people, and the only people that seem to win are the ones that like started the particular currency or DAO or whatever. They get all their funds and then they fuck off. And that's, I mean, we saw it in the most pure fashion with NFTs. And particularly when it comes to NFTs, I can't recommend highly enough. There's a YouTube documentary called The Line Goes Up that was just a 2-hour indictment of everything to do with NFTs that I really appreciate. But I'm not saying everything is garbage and that there's nothing valuable in the cryptocurrency space. I just think it's really hard to find the genuinely valuable stuff and like intellectually honest stuff, like meaningful exploration of what it means to truly decentralized currency in an intellectually honest fashion versus like all of this crap that's mostly like cult like huddle culture, like hold on to your money, keep it where I tell you to keep it, we're all going to be rich. I know that doesn't make sense, but whatever. It's like it makes me very uncomfortable.
Costin, you see utility for this though. I feel like I sense just slowly over the weeks that you're, I don't want to say a fan of this magic money place, but you see utility beyond what I think it's a playground for cybercrime. What is the real utility beyond cyber criminal activity, North Korean thieving money activity? What is the real utility? Where do you see value?
I think, well, I would like to tie this into another topic we wanted to discuss, but maybe actually that's a good example. So I really want to mention it. So I was thinking that, we have elections in Romania, and it's an absolutely crazy situation. We have all politicians essentially competing for places in the Senate, in the Parliament, for the president. Everyone's making like all these promises, like if you elect me your president, the fuel will be 10 cents for a liter, which is, I don't know, 40 cents a gallon or whatever. Or if you elect me a president, you'll be able to buy houses for 35,000 euros. If you elect me president, you will be able to, I don't know, buy 10 times more food cheaper, and you'll have clean water. So there's like everyone is promising everything you can imagine. And I was thinking, like, you know, eventually somebody gets elected and they do none of that, zero. Or maybe they do one of 100. So I was thinking, like, this is something where blockchains can come to the rescue. So I say, this was like an idea. Every politician, whenever they go for a position, whatever, a seat in the parliament, they record their promises in the blockchain. So if you say that the fuel next year in June will be 1 cent a liter, okay, that's recorded in the blockchain for you, for your name. And everybody records all these promises. Maybe some people will record just one thing, other people will record 100 different things. Come June, we look, what is the price of the fuel? It's still $1 for a liter. Out. You're out.
Why do we need
What
a
is the price
blockchain?
of
Why can't
food?
we put it on
You're
a
out.
website?
Because then they will say, like, I was misunderstood. I didn't mean it that way. I mean it in a different manner. So I want things to be clear. So I was thinking, like, this is a sort of a problem that, and actually this is why it will never be accepted. Maybe not in the next 1,000 years. Maybe in 2,000 years it will eventually be accepted. But you need some kind of accountability, if you want. Like, everyone's promising the sun and the moon, and nobody does anything of that. Like, whenever they become president or senators or whatever, they do nothing and just get rich themselves.
I think the funny thing about all of these discussions about governance and whatnot that come up with the blockchain is it, it's a lack of appreciation for what social institutions mean and why they're important and why they work. Like, at the end of the day, we can put all of that shit in the blockchain and we can make it cryptographically assured, and it just will not matter unless we as an institution decide that this is genuinely something important for us to uphold. And I think that's why I laugh whenever we have conversations about like the magic money stuff here. We go, oh, look at these, idiots, and like how they stole all their shit. And you go, yeah, I mean, like, we're trying to come up with some way to like hide where this stuff is it goes, and like to keep transactions from being able to be used. And we'll sit here and be like, well, that kind of sounds like you're just like rebuilding banks, right? Like, at the end of the day, these things were all created for a reason. And like we came up with, we've come a long way from John Locke and like deciding what it means to like codify value in a non um, transitory or ephemeral fashion. And by that I mean, like, back in the day,
Mm.
we used to store grain and fruits and whatever, and those things had a limited, like, they would decay. Their value would perish over time. And then we created currency, which meant that we now had something whose value does not decay over time, and it's mostly built on a socially agreed upon system of trade and value. There's a reason why, like, the dollar, it's like valid, it says it like valid for all debts, blah blah blah. The whole purpose of it is we have all socially agreed this thing has permanent value and we will accept it and trade it amongst ourselves. So crypto, like, the crypto enthusiasts and the libertarians, like, wanting to rewrite the world on the back of a napkin because now we can involve math. Cool, but you are like they are sort of ignoring the very important and very brittle social organizational elements of currency the same way that's like the social organizational elements of like voting, right? Like democracy in Venezuela doesn't suck because the ballots are not good or the computers that are being used the ballots are not good or the people who are counting the ballots don't know how to count. They suck because you don't have any strong social institutions, so the military will literally grab ballot boxes and set them on fire or like decide that they can be stuffed or changed or you just smile your way and say, yeah, nope, we won. And you go, no, but we counted. Like, no, we won. Like there's no, I think it's like a techno utopian view to think that what's missing is making it making it codified or making it mathematically or cryptographically assured, when in reality what's missing is like moral standards and people willing to enforce like difficult things in social institutions and to take it in the chin and say, hey, this is the right thing for this country, for this organization, for these people, beyond any kind of standard of personal enrichment. And that's why like we're all celebrating the cold-blooded assassination of a CEO, because it's the first time we've seen anybody face any fucking consequences in this country in God knows how long. And that's not because the currency hasn't been programmed correctly, right? Like it's because people are not enforcing societal standards.
We just lost all 5 of our Magic Money fans and listeners
Well,
with those connections.
To introduce
I'm
the three-body problem
because
DAO.
if you're listening to the pod without seeing us, you are missing an amazing thing. You're missing seeing Juan say all these things, wearing a very special blanket, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Quickly, Costin, because we gotta end this show. You mentioned at the top, and you mentioned several times during this thing, the crisis in Romania around elections. And I bring this up because there was a prior episode where we discussed Thomas Rid's paper on election interference and misinformation and the value of it and whether it works or not and the money spent and whether people were just saying that it works to get their budgeting and so on. And you warned in the early days, listen, be careful that this thing actually works. It's working at scale across many, many different places. We've landed smack dab into, I believe, almost a direct prediction of yours that TikTok and misinformation influence and Russian interference in an election will cause some sort of crisis. You guys actually canceled an election that was supposed to happen yesterday, like on the day of, while people were actually voting. Fill us in on what's happening.
First of all, we didn't cancel the elections that was supposed to be happening, but actually we canceled the election while it was happening. Like people were voting already, and the results of those votes were coming in. And in the middle of the voting, they decided to cancel the election and start from scratch, basically.
And alongside that, there was a public release of Romanian intelligence documents that were declassified that actually pointed very, very specific instances of Russian influence in the election. Was this influence, let me just ask the question quickly, was there any sort of hacking, election machine hacking, any sort of compromising at all? Or this was just all influence, disinformation, misinformation related?
So from all the documents that have been published, and by the way, we translated some of them using Claude, and actually Claude does a good job, right, at translating the Romanian and summarizing it. There's essentially no evidence that the vote was changed in any kind of way through hacking. Like there were no successful hacking attempts that have been mentioned in any of these documents. So again, speaking strictly from the content of the documents that have been declassified, the documents coming basically from the Romanian Intelligence Service, SRI, the Foreign Intelligence Service, SIE, the Internal Ministry of Affairs, as I think there was also another document in there. So there's 5 or 6 documents which have been declassified, and they cover all these points. No classical hacking changing the outcome of the vote. No.
There's a mention of 85,000 cyber attacks on electoral systems, attacks originating from 33 plus countries using advanced anonymization methods. This is the Claude translation of your Romanian document. One, is the translation accurate? Two, and if there's no hacking, what is this 85,000 cyber attacks number?
The translation is accurate, and that's exactly what it says in the document. There have been 85,000. But again, it's difficult to understand what that means. The way I read it and the way I read these documents is that they don't have a full picture of everything that has been happening, but there have been some very unusual anomalies. So just let me maybe walk you back a couple of weeks ago on November 24th, when we had the first round of elections. So before that, the general prediction was the current Prime Minister of Romania, Marcel Ciolacu, is going to win. He will be the next president. It was more or less, let's say, decided in the sense there was no surprises expected. Now, as soon
is your polling
as
generally, quickly, is your polling generally accurate with that stuff, like these kind of prediction? The polling shows.
Very.
Traditionally, it's been very accurate. Okay.
Traditionally has been very, very accurate, and they actually account for all sorts of things. In the past, what we have seen, and by the way, this is also seen in Moldova, during the last elections, is typically the votes coming from outside the country. Sometimes they tip the balance the other way around. So Moldova was actually going to vote for the pro-Russian president, but the votes from outside of the Moldova, they changed the outcome of the vote. So this actually happened in Romania before, when one of our presidents, Traian Băsescu, was going against Mircea Joana, I think about 10 or 12 years ago, maybe a bit longer. And this happened as well in Romania. So votes coming from the outside, they changed the results. So typically these predictions are pretty cool, or they're pretty accurate, and they do take these kind of things into account as well. So again, the predictions were pretty, let's say, clear. They say it's unlikely to see any big surprises. But from the beginning, there was a controversy that they banned one candidate from participating. There's an extremist called Diana Șoșoacă, and they said, like, Diana Șoșoacă cannot participate in the voting, so we will remove her from the lists because of her extremist activities. A lot of people complained, including like politicians who were on the list. They said it's not good to interfere in the elections. Just imagine that in the US they would decide that RFK won't be allowed to participate because of his opinions about vaccines, let's say. It's strange. So what happened is that because they removed that person, her voters kind of shifted tactics and they leaned to other candidates, kind of skewing the predictions. That's one from the beginning. But then I think at 9 p.m. when the first results of the elections came, immediately was a shock for everyone because Marcel Ciolacu was in the first place as expected, and I think in the second place there was a liberal candidate, and what people didn't really expect was a candidate that was in the fourth place, which was somebody nobody's ever heard of, Călin Georgescu. So I looked at those, I looked at my wife and I asked her, like, who is Călin Georgescu? And she said, who is Călin Georgescu? We never heard about this guy. It's somebody who appeared out of nowhere and now he's like in the fourth place. And out of 14 candidates, he's now in the fourth place. And that seemed a bit like weird because we asked like some of our friends, nobody's heard of this person before. But we said, like, maybe it's not out of the usual. But then as the votes started to actually come in, and there is a website where you could watch the results in real time, votes coming in, you could see that actually Călin Georgescu was moving from the fourth position to the third. And as more votes appear, he moved to the second. And around midnight at 12, my wife was asleep. He actually moved to the first position. And I was like waking my wife, wake up, Călin Georgescu now is in the first place. And we were like, how is it possible that a guy that we haven't heard about before is now the main choice of the Romanian people? So that was like all super weird. And yeah, the next day people started Googling and trying to understand. And there were some very interesting research is being published that somebody paid hundreds of Romanian influencers to make some certain kinds of videos. And these videos, the instructions were very clear. The instructions said you do not name any candidate, but instead you say that go out and vote. And the kind of person that will be the next president of Romania should be someone who is well educated, smart, intelligent, well read, has strong opinions, and is a very correct person. So everyone was saying all these things. Like you could watch actually some of these TikTok videos, and you have to understand TikTok is huge in Romania. I'm the exception here. I didn't have this app, but there's like 9 million people TikTok users in Romania, which is half of the country.
TikTok is huge everywhere, by the way. It surpassed Google as like the most used website like a year ago. Like it's genuine. Like we are genuinely in like boomer territory in the fact that like the three of us don't use TikTok. But as a global phenomenon, it is not like an up and coming thing. It took over the internet more than a year ago. Just to put that out there.
Makes sense. It makes sense. Yeah. So
but wait a second. Did you guys have distrust of TikTok conversations in the country before this China? Because TikTok is a controversial topic here. Trump originally, Microsoft originally tried to buy it. There was a whole drama around it being sold here in the US, whether it should be banned, blah blah blah. Is that the same conversation you're having?
There were some news related to US wanting to ban TikTok, but I don't think anyone paid attention to that because like that's US. But in Romania, this is, well, let's put it the other way. A lot of people are living very unexciting lives where nothing happens, and now suddenly there's
TikTok
a lot happening. There's a lot happening, yeah. And there's like influencers in Romania who have millions of followers. Again, this is that the population of Romania is estimated at something like 18 million people. So imagine you have millions of people in Romania as your followers. All those people are listening to everything that you are saying. And yeah, hundreds of influencers were paid to push out these videos, which again, they're not pointing to any candidate, but they're saying that the ideal candidate needs to be like that. And then for every single of these videos, there's, and this comes the best part, there's like 30,000 comments. Bots, like whatever you want, 30,000 comments saying that has to be this guy, that has to be Călin Georgescu. I am voting for Călin Georgescu, like Călin Georgescu, our president, and like thousands and thousands of comments. So when you're listening like to all these influencers, then you look at the comments, and in the comments, like 90% of the comments are vote for this guy. And also, I think there was like a very powerful message which said, we are all massively voting for Călin Georgescu, like this exact wording. And amazing as it seems to have actually worked. And 2 million people voted for someone, again, that we haven't heard of before. And now as more people
you think it's a direct result of a Russian influence campaign that did these bots and just putting this name in front of voters right around the same time?
Well, according to these reports that have been declassified, they say certain things which are quite interesting. One, they say that well, somebody paid a lot of money to those influencers. That's one, through a platform called FameUp. Then somebody actually published all those comments, right? And then they found like different entities inside Romania which paid as much as $1 million to different influencers to promote these videos. So there's been like a strong promotion. That's one of the things which is in the reports. The other one is that this particular candidate seems to be favorable of Russia. So in the past, he said that President Putin loves his country. He said that Ukraine is not our problem. Like we shouldn't get involved into the Ukraine war. For the record, Romania is like strongly supporting Ukraine. So they said all these different things, like we shouldn't get involved. Yeah, and not only that, but also neo-Nazi messaging, supporting some of the Romanian extremist organizations between the two wars and so on. So kind of a controversial figure. If you ask me, I don't think the goal was to actually get him elected. I think the goal was more like towards dividing the society, so that now everyone is fighting with everyone. Families inside the same family, people are, supporting different candidates. So there's like a lot of controversy. Of course, the controversy didn't stop there. When again, in the end, it was Călin Georgescu and Elena Lasconi, which was a more libertarian candidate who went to the second round. When again, the initial assumptions was that the prime minister is going to win the elections, and he didn't
And
make
he's
it to the
nowhere in
second
these
round.
top three, right?
He wasn't in the top two, basically, who go into the next round. So what
Wow.
happened there was they, between the elections, several people made complaints, so they started recounting the votes. Because the difference between Lasconi and the prime minister was 6,000 votes to 1.6 million. So each one received 1.6 million, and the difference between them was 6,000. So they started recounting the votes. Again, a lot of protests, like this is not democracy. But they recounted the votes and they confirmed the results. They said Călin Georgescu is number one, nothing changed. Elena Lasconi is number two, nothing changed. Marcel Ciolac is number three, nothing changes. Results are validated. We recounted the paper ballots. There's no hacking, no problem, no nothing. We're going to the second round. And as the second round started, it was cancelled because of elections interference. So everything will go back to square one. If you ask me, I think yes, you can understand from the documents that there has been interference. Yes, somebody wanted Călin Georgescu to be the preferred candidate. Essentially, they massively boosted him through different platforms. I think the other things like hacking, attacks on the election infrastructure are inconsequential. They didn't change the results, but the whole process is kind of tainted, which is why they decided to restart it. But nobody knows for sure what's going to happen, because if you restart the process, I think that they'll have the same situation. Like the same guy will be number one, same person will be number two, and so on. So the only possible change is if they somehow decide to ban Călin Georgescu from going again for president, which would be again an unheard of, never before seen decision to ban candidates from participating in elections because of the fear that people will be voting for them and they will become president.
Is there
Well,
talk
I
of
mean,
banning
that's
TikTok?
There was a lot of talk of banning TikTok, which is stupid in my opinion. One of the vice presidents of a Romanian Association of Telecom Operators, he suggested they ban TikTok in between the elections. I think that if they did that, that would be like a guaranteed win for that guy, because the hate will be like absolutely insane. The hate from all the people. Imagine that somebody in Russia bans vodka between the elections. Like whoever, like yeah,
they have
it's
tried that
impossible.
before.
They have tried that.
Well, at some point, I want to say it was like Yeltsin era. Anyways,
Yeah, I remember. Yes, correct.
Juan, put a bow. Juan, put a bow on the episode. Like is this counter to democracy in a way?
no. Look, personally, I think the only solution is to ban that candidate. And I know that shit sounds super unpalatable.
Based on
but
what, though? Based on the fact that another country prefers that he's the preferred candidate? Every country prefers that a preferred candidate.
no,
Every country has a preferred candidate.
it's the real politic of the situation, right? Like we could sit around waiting and go, well, we can spend 6 months investigating whether Georgescu himself is somehow related to this um, external campaign, just not just enriching from it, but also somehow colluding And that's something that we have experience with, right? Like you can sit around waiting to see whether collusion is involved here, and therefore try to blame him and oust him. But I would suggest that under the circumstances where you clearly know, A, somebody is interfering in your election who is um, not like a distant foreign hypothetical threat, but a very up close and realistic problem, trying to turn you into a puppet state of some sort. And the greatest casualty is somebody nobody had ever heard of, nobody had ever like actually thought to vote for in the past. We can sit around and talk about like maybe you ban TikTok, which doesn't change the exposure. It doesn't change the messaging that has gone to all these people that was clearly unmanaged in this sort of IO campaign that TikTok probably should have fucking handled before. I'm also really curious about this Fame Up connection because right there and then you have like an interesting element of like financial remuneration and coordination with there must be a source of some sort, even if it's kind of a hidden hand. Um, but in any case, I think the question I would ask is, are we so blindly principled about democracy that we're willing to let it be subverted in order to keep the promises that are on the tin, even when the spirit of what democracy is supposed to be is being subverted? And I personally am not. I would rather ban this person pending an investigation into whether they have been involved in a what appears to be a well documented foreign IO campaign, and and then move on to having an election instead of living in like a state of constitutional crisis for an indefinite amount of time, rather than, oh, we're just going to do it again, and then whatever happens happens. You're like, you know what's going to happen, you know what somebody else is trying to make happen. Like I really don't believe in lemming walking our way based on supposed ideals into a terrible situation.
But what
But
does
are
this
you are
say
you saying?
about? Wait, wait.
Yeah,
Let me
are
ask
you
this
saying
question,
that?
Costin.
Can I ask one question first?
Go, go, go.
Are you saying that, in the end, it's people going out there to vote, casting their votes on paper and then counting the papers? Are you saying that basically people cannot be trusted to make the choice for their country?
Yeah, no, yeah, they never have been. I mean, that's never the, very Churchillian notion of like, d democracy sucks. We just don't know anything better. But um, that is very much something that reflects the fact that the wonders of democracy have to do not with the choice of the people alone, but rather that it is a shared investment in our future, in that we have all, like before, if you talked about sort of the agora, sorry, I'm like really like going super historical and overly conceptual, but the whole notion of early democracy was like only people who had a vested interest, like property owners, were allowed to cast votes as to what was going to happen in this country and in a country. And I'm not saying that that's a good model. I'm saying the spirit of it was, you own a piece of this, therefore you must be concerned about its well-being and its future. And I would, if we wanted to apply that to the failing, American, paradigm right now, uh, I think that disenfranchisement is at the core of all of our problems, in the sense of, we can see rampant corruption, we can see rampant agglomeration of resources, and nobody seems to give a shit, and there are no consequences for anybody. So that's how you get this anti-establishment vote. You go, nobody's supporting me, nobody's defending me, so fuck you and your system. I'm going to tear the whole thing down. The When it comes to this discussion about democracy, I think that there's some Karl Popper appropriate argument about this paradox of tolerance, of this notion that we should be so democratic that we will allow democracy to swallow itself, because at least we will have been democratic until the end of our days. And I think that forgets that democracies are democratic republics, and they're about choosing stewards that will safeguard the nation but at the end of the day, like the reason we had an electoral college was ended up being a bastardized, horrendous idea in the end because people can be trusted and you don't have any repercussions. The idea was, yeah, but we're also a nation that seems to love scam artists and it's easy to like buy votes, right? Like what we're talking about here is a different version of the populist campaigning that's happened in Latin America and Asia in the past, where you go, vote for me, I will give you free rice and I will build you a home. And that's how Venezuela fell, and that's how a lot of countries have fallen because a lot of people want free rice and homes. So the idea was having an electoral college was, well, we're going to have some safeguard wherein populism is not the only thing that will determine the well-being of our nation. And yes, the electoral college has been a fucking terrible aberration now, but the principle of it was you can't just have it be populism. You can't just have it be whatever the majority of people do, which is also why Congress is structured the way that it is between the Senate and the House and blah, 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 blah. Which is just to say, I just don't believe in lemming walking off a ledge because of what is written as like the print, the literal interpretation of the law versus the spirit of the law. You're talking about a constitutional crisis in this country, in that country. And, to me, banning a shitty option that is perhaps in cahoots, but definitely in no way engaged in like clean campaigning is not a crisis. Like it
But
is
what does
not a
this say?
thing where I'm like,
What
this
does
is
this
the
say
end of
about
our country. It's like, no, it will be if you don't protect it.
what does this say about the ability of your country and your people and the people required to vote to discern between bot traffic promoting some Georgescu? I mean, isn't that the source of the issue? Is that our people are unable to determine that like bots are taking over their thoughts and this misinformation is happening? Is that an education weakness in our society? Where do we fix that?
Personally, I won't speak about Romania, but I do have really strong thoughts on this in the sense that in the US, there's definitely an educational crisis that's attached to these things, right? Like, it's not just civic and governmental education, but really it's a matter of like our educational system does not promote any kind of discernment whatsoever. We've moved towards like standardized testing and all these things that are proven to be just terrible fucking educational system. So in a way, you've let your common population become increasingly ignorant and undiscerning. And then you have to factor in the fact that, like, this is a new paradigm for humanity. We are not physically, mentally, in any way adapted or adjusted for like the infinite scroll dopamine factory of manufactured social support and mobs and consent. Like, look at what Costin is describing, right? The video says you need a candidate who's just a wonderful human being, and then there's 400,000 bots underneath going, oh, you want a wonderful human being? It's that guy. And why do it that way? In a lot of ways, what you're saying is you're co-opting the openness and air of influence of an influencer that's telling you to be this idealistic, high-minded thinker that cares about God knows what. And then you have what seems to be a mob of people that suggests that the popular conception, most of the people in my society seem to believe that this candidate fits the bill for what this influential person is describing. It is actually a really clever ruse. Like, it's a two-part bit of theatrical play that engages different parts of our humanity. We want to be a part of a group. We want to be correct. We want to be high-minded. And most of us are woefully ignorant at the same time.
Costin, banning
So
Georgescu
it
and banning
works
TikTok
together.
doesn't fix that, though.
Well, I think it maybe temporarily fixes it, right? It
Yeah.
kind of restores the balance for a bit. It's sad. It's sad that you have to resort to censorship in order to fix the flaws of democracy. In the Romanian constitution, it says that censorship is forbidden. Like this is not allowed. And in the end, it actually comes to exactly that: censorship of candidates, of online media platforms, simply because, yeah, people are too easy to influence. I mean, we've seen this back to the days of Cambridge Analytica, I think, right? Brexit and the election of different politicians around the world. I think it means that, yeah, psychology works. There's, of course, more to this issue, and there are some crazy connections between Călin Georgescu and RFK Jr. RFK wrote the book, I think, called Fauci Lied, and Georgescu wrote the preface for that book in Romania.
Wow.
Donald Trump Jr. Wrote a message in support of Georgescu. The Biden administration wrote a message in support of the decision to cancel the election. So, in a way, it feels, yeah, we are like a little country somewhere, which is maybe a reflection of bigger things happening in the world, bigger things happening in the United States. Yeah, we are like a pivotal moment in history when there's a change in governments in the United States, and all that reflects. You can see the effects of all that. So I think that if the US bans TikTok, then it will probably be banned in Romania as well. First of all, possibly in the whole of European Union, and it is inevitable because of the power that it holds over people.
All right, I'm going to stop us from having a 2-hour episode by closing it right here. Do you guys have any last-minute shout-outs you want to do before we leave?
Can I do a shout out to all the wonderful people at Gen Digital headquarters in Prague? I was there this week to meet with a friend, and I met several people who actually are listening to our show. That means we have 33 listeners probably now. So shout out to all the
50,
wonderful
50
people
plus.
at Gen listening to us. Thank you, guys.
Juanito?
Shout out to the folks at Binary Ninja who were really amazing during this iteration of the course. Like also Hexray, Ida Pro, like they provide licenses, but like the Binary Ninja guys like went above and beyond on like helping us and providing like even like live tech support and anything that we needed to kind of get these folks. And I think this course would be impossible. It was impossible 2 years ago to take non-technical students and actually walk them through doing like the full breadth of trying to analyze a malware sample. And LLMs are a huge part of that, but then also having these more modern, well-supported tools that students can have access to and that they can then take that access and continue to use the tool. I think it's just like this amazing democratization of reverse engineering and actually building past that supposed skills gap that we so badly want to close. So, I don't know that everyone in the course will become an RE, but the idea that after a week's worth of coursework, you might have one or two more people joining what is a very esoteric specialization that we desperately need is really encouraging. So, shout out to those guys for supporting Vector 35 and everything.
And from my side, we've spent a lot of time talking about the scattered spider com assholes that have been wreaking havoc and the fact that we can't be tracking and these kids are running around. Shout out to the U.S. authorities and whoever the law enforcement folks are, Allison Nixon and all those folks who are rolling up all those kids and getting them arrested all over the place. So that's been kind of like one good success story news that's been we haven't really covered. So shout out to those folks, and we'll catch you again next week.
Ciao.
Thanks, everyone.